Gonbad-e Qabus Tower, the tallest brick tower in the world. Welcome. Today I am going to tell you a story that will leave you speechless. You might have heard about the Taj Mahal, the Eiffel Tower, or the pyramids of Egypt. Maybe you know them as symbols of love, engineering marvels, or wonders of the ancient world. But today, I am going to tell you about a monument that stands alone in the plains of northern Iran, a golden needle piercing the sky, a tower that has survived for more than 1,000 years. This is the story that history books rarely tell in full. The Gonbad-e Qabus Tower is not just a building, it is a legacy of genius, a monument to knowledge, and a mystery that even today scientists cannot fully explain. This is a story of a warrior king who was also a poet, a scholar who hosted the greatest minds of his time, and a man whose ambition reached so high that he built a tower that could be seen from 30 kilometers away. After listening to this, you will be shocked to know how one man's vision created something that still stands after a millennium, defying earthquakes, wars, and the passage of time. And this is not just a history lesson, this is a perfect story for your English listening practice. So sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey back in time, a journey of power, wisdom, ambition, and an unforgettable legacy. The rise of a warrior poet. Now let's begin. To understand the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower, we must go back in time to the year 978 CE. Imagine the plains of northern Persia, where the Caspian Sea meets the ancient lands of Tabaristan and Gorgan. The air smells of pine forests from the nearby mountains, and the fertile valleys bloom with pomegranate orchards and rice fields. The rivers flow from the Alborz Mountains, feeding the lush green landscape. This was a land of warriors, scholars, and traders on the ancient Silk Road. This was the world of Qabus ibn Vashmagir, a young prince who had just seized power in one of the most dramatic comebacks in Persian history. But before we talk about his triumph, we need to understand his tragedy. Qabus was born into the Ziyarid dynasty, a powerful family that ruled over the northern territories of Persia during the Islamic Golden Age. His father, Vashmagir, was a formidable ruler, and his mother was a princess from the noble Bavandi family. Qabus was raised in palaces decorated with silk carpets from Bukhara, surrounded by poets reciting verses in Persian and Arabic, and trained by the finest warriors and scholars of his time. But when Vashmagir died in 967, everything changed. Qabus had a chance to rule, to take his father's throne and become the next king. The Samanid Empire, a powerful neighboring kingdom, supported Qabus as the rightful heir. They sent an army to help him. Victory seemed certain, the crown was within his grasp. But then his older brother Bisutan made his move. With the help of the rival Buyid dynasty, Bisutan seized the capital city of Jorjan. He took control of the army, the treasury, the palaces, everything. Qabus, the rightful heir, was forced to flee. For 10 years, Qabus lived in exile, wandering from city to city, sometimes welcomed as a guest, sometimes barely surviving. He slept in borrowed rooms, ate at the tables of minor nobles who pitied him, and dreamed of the day he would return. Those 10 years changed him. He studied philosophy with wandering scholars. He learned to write poetry in Persian and Arabic. He mastered astronomy and mathematics. He became a calligrapher, perfecting the elegant Kufic script. But most importantly, he learned patience. He learned to wait. He learned that true power comes not just from swords and armies, but from wisdom and knowledge. And then in 997, his brother Bisutan died. The throne was empty once again. Qabus did not hesitate. With the support of powerful allies, including the Buyid ruler Ad al-Dawla, he marched on Jorjan. His enemies expected a defeated, broken prince. Instead, they faced a brilliant strategist. The Ziyarid army, remembering his father's glory and impressed by Qabus's reputation as a man of both war and wisdom, rallied to his side. Within months, Qabus had reclaimed everything. He was now Shams al-Ma'ali Qabus ibn Vashmagir, the son of high fortune, the undisputed ruler of Jorjan and Tabaristan. But Qabus was not like other kings. He had no interest in simply collecting taxes and fighting wars. He had spent 10 years in exile, reading, thinking, and dreaming. Now that he had power, he wanted to create something that would last forever. He wanted to build a center of learning that would rival Baghdad. He wanted to gather the greatest minds in the world under his protection. And that is exactly what he did. The Court of Brilliance. Imagine walking through the streets of Jorjan, the ancient capital of Qabus's kingdom around the year 1000. The city bustled with activity. Merchants from Central Asia displayed silk and spices in the bazaar. Scholars debated philosophy in the courtyards of madrasas. The air filled with the sounds of poets reciting their latest verses, musicians playing the oud and tambour, and students arguing about mathematics and astronomy. But the real center of intellectual life was Qabus's court. The king himself was unlike any ruler of his time. In the morning, he would meet with his generals to discuss military strategy. In the afternoon, he would sit with astronomers discussing the movements of the planets. In the evening, he would host poetry competitions, where the finest poets would recite their work, and Qabus himself would often participate, composing verses on the spot. Qabus was obsessed with knowledge. He collected manuscripts from across the Islamic world, from Baghdad, Damascus, Bukhara, and beyond. His library contained works by Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy, and the great Islamic philosophers. He paid generous salaries, asking nothing in return except that they pursue their research and share their discoveries. And then, one by one, the greatest minds of the Islamic Golden Age began to arrive in Jorjan.
First came Abu Rayyan al-Biruni, the polymath who would later be called the Master and compared to Leonardo da Vinci. Al-Biruni was a genius in mathematics, astronomy, physics, geography, and history. He was also homeless. The powerful Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni had demanded that all the great scholars of Central Asia come to his court. Al-Biruni, along with several other intellectuals, refused. They would not serve a brutal conqueror who cared only for military glory. They wanted a patron who valued wisdom. So they fled, and they came to Qabus. Al-Biruni arrived in Gorgan around 998, exhausted from his journey but filled with hope. Qabus welcomed him with open arms. He gave al-Biruni a house, a salary, and access to his magnificent library. He asked only one thing: continue your work, pursue knowledge, let nothing stop you. And al-Biruni did just that. In Qabus's court, al-Biruni wrote one of his most important works, Al-Athar al-Baqiyya, The Remaining Traces of Past Centuries, a groundbreaking study of calendars, chronology, and the calculation of time across different cultures. This work would influence scholars for centuries to come. Al-Biruni dedicated this book to his patron, calling Qabus Shams al-Ma'ali, the radiant sun who illuminated the world with his support for learning. But al-Biruni was not alone. Another scholar was making his way to Gorgan, a young man who would become one of the most influential thinkers in all of human history. His name was Ibn Sina. You might know him by his Latin name, Avicenna. Ibn Sina was only in his early 20s, but he was already famous across Persia. By the age of 10, he had memorized the entire Quran. By 16, he had mastered medicine and was treating patients. By 18, he had read everything: philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, logic, physics. He was a genius, perhaps the greatest philosophical mind of the medieval world. But like al-Biruni, Ibn Sina was a fugitive. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni wanted to collect all the great scholars like trophies. He sent letters demanding that Ibn Sina come to his court. Ibn Sina refused. He would not be a decoration in some tyrant's palace. He wanted freedom to think, to write, to explore the deepest questions of existence. So Ibn Sina fled westward, traveling through dangerous territory with his companion Abu Sal al-Masihi. They got lost in the desert. Al-Masihi died of thirst. Ibn Sina, sick and exhausted, barely survived. When he finally reached Gorgan around 1012, he had nothing, no books, no money, no home. But he had heard about Qabus. He had heard about the warrior king who was also a poet, the ruler who loved knowledge more than conquest. Ibn Sina hoped that Qabus would give him refuge. Tragically, when Ibn Sina arrived in Gorgan, Qabus was already dead. But even though he never met his hero, Ibn Sina stayed in Gorgan for 2 years. The people there, remembering their king's love of learning, welcomed Ibn Sina with kindness. A wealthy patron named Abu Muhammad Shirazi bought a house for Ibn Sina next to his own and took care of him. In that house, Ibn Sina began working on the masterpieces that would change the world, the canon of medicine, which would be used in European universities for 600 years, and the Book of Healing, an encyclopedia of philosophy and science. This was the legacy of Qabus. Even after his death, his court continued to nurture genius. But what about Qabus himself? What was he writing? What was he creating during these golden years? Qabus was not just a patron of scholars, he was a scholar himself. He wrote poetry in both Persian and Arabic, mastering the new style of rhymed prose that was becoming popular. His verses explored themes of power, mortality, love, and the stars. He was also an astrologer and astronomer, studying the movements of the heavens with the same passion that he studied human nature. His court became legendary. Poets would travel for months just to attend one of his gatherings. Philosophers would debate late into the night, with Qabus himself joining the discussions, challenging their ideas, asking impossible questions. Scientists would present their discoveries, and Qabus would fund their research without hesitation. For nearly 30 years, from 978 to 1012, Qabus ruled over a kingdom that was relatively small in territory, but enormous in intellectual achievement. His capital, Georgian, became one of the great centers of the Islamic Golden Age, rivaling Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba. But Qabus knew something that troubled him deeply. He knew that empires fall, cities burn, libraries are destroyed. The Mongols would eventually sweep through this region, reducing everything to ashes. He had seen how quickly power could vanish. He himself had spent 10 years in exile, watching his brother rule the kingdom that should have been his. So Qabus decided to build something that would outlast everything, something that would stand when palaces crumbled and books burned, something that would tell the world, here lived Qabus, a man who loved wisdom and reached for the stars. He decided to build a tower, not just any tower, the tallest brick tower the world had ever seen. A vision reaches for the sky. In the year 1006, Qabus made his decision. He called the finest architects and engineers from across Persia to his court. He told his vision, "Build me a tower so tall that travelers can see it from 30 kilometers away. Make it so perfect that it will stand for 1,000 years. Use only brick, nothing else. Let it rise like a golden needle from the earth to the heavens, and let it carry my name into eternity." The architects were shocked. What Qabus was asking for seemed impossible. A tower of pure brick, more than 50 meters tall, with no steel, no concrete, no modern engineering, and it had to survive in a region plagued by earthquakes? They told Qabus it couldn't be done. But Qabus was not a man who accepted impossible. He was a man who had spent 10 years in exile and still reclaimed his throne. He was a man who turned his court into a center of learning despite being surrounded by warring empires. He was a man who believed that human genius, when properly directed, could achieve miracles. "Find a way," he said. "I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. Build it." And so the work began.
First, they needed to find the perfect location. Qabus chose a site just outside Jorjan, on a gentle rise that would give the tower even more height and visibility. They built an artificial hill, 10 meters high as the foundation. This hill was not just for show, it would protect the tower's base from floods and provide stability. Then came the real challenge, the design. The tower had to be tall, but it also had to be stable. It had to withstand winds, earthquakes, and the weight of its own bricks. The architects studied mathematics and geometry, calculating angles, ratios, and structural loads with extraordinary precision. They created a revolutionary design, a cylinder with 10 sharp buttresses, creating a shape like a 10-pointed star when viewed from above. This wasn't just beautiful, it was brilliant engineering. The buttresses would strengthen the tower, distributing weight and resisting the forces of wind and earthquakes. The tower would taper slightly from bottom to top, giving it perfect proportions and making it even stronger. The interior diameter at the base was 9.67 meters. The walls were 3 meters thick, solid, unglazed, fired brick. The exterior diameter was 17 meters at the bottom, narrowing to 15.5 meters at the top. The total height, including the conical roof, would be 53 meters, more than 3 times its diameter. It would be the tallest brick structure of its time. But here's what made it truly revolutionary. The entire structure would be load-bearing brick. Every single brick would support the bricks about it. There would be no internal support structure, no wooden beams, no iron reinforcements, just brick, mortar, and mathematical genius. They used the finest quality bricks, baked at precise temperatures to give them maximum strength. The bricks were originally red, but the architects knew that centuries of sunlight would turn them golden, and they were right. Today, the tower glows like burnished gold in the afternoon sun. The construction took years. 20,000 workers labored day and night, laying brick after brick with meticulous care. Qabus visited the construction site regularly, watching his dream rise from the earth. He consulted with the architects about every detail: the angle of the buttresses, the thickness of the walls, the inscriptions that would encircle the tower. Ah, yes, the inscriptions. Qabus was a master of rhymed prose, and he wanted his tower to carry a message written in the most beautiful Kufic script. 2 bands of inscription would ring the tower, one above the entrance, one below the conical roof. Each band was divided into 10 panels, one between each pair of buttresses. The inscription reads, "This tall palace for the Prince Shams-ul-Ma'ali, Amir Qabus ibn Wushimgir, ordered to build during his life in the year 397 of the lunar Hejira and the year 375 of the solar Hejira." Notice something fascinating. Qabus used both calendars, the Islamic lunar calendar and the ancient Persian solar calendar. This was deliberate. Qabus wanted to honor both the Islamic civilization he was part of and the pre-Islamic Persian culture he cherished. The Zirid dynasty was known for reviving Persian traditions after the Arab conquest, and this double dating system was a proud statement. I am Persian and I am Muslim, and both are part of who I am. The tower had only one entrance, on the southeastern side, surmounted by beautiful tri-lobed niches. These niches contained some of the earliest examples of muqarnas, the stalactite vaulting that would later become famous in Islamic architecture across the world.
The Gonbad-e Qabus Tower pioneered this decorative technique. Inside, the tower was completely hollow, a vast cylindrical chamber that soared upward into darkness. The walls were bare brick. There was no decoration, no ornament, just pure geometry and perfect proportions. The simplicity was breathtaking. And at the very top, the conical roof rose another 18 meters, capped with a single small window facing east, toward the rising sun. By 10:07, the tower was complete. It stood like a golden giant on the plains of Gorgon, visible from 30 kilometers in every direction. Travelers on the Silk Road would see it from a day's journey away and know they were approaching Georgian. It became a landmark, a beacon, a symbol of Qabus's power and wisdom. But here's the great mystery. What was it for? The mystery of the glass coffin. Everyone assumed the tower was Qabus's tomb. After all, he built it himself during his life, and he clearly intended it to be his final resting place. The inscription says he ordered it built during his life, meaning he knew exactly what it was for. But when archaeologists excavated the tower centuries later, they found no body, no tomb, no burial chamber. Nothing. The interior was completely empty, except for some chains hanging from the ceiling. This led to one of the most intriguing legends in all of Persian history. According to the legend, Qabus ordered that when he died, his body should be placed in a crystal coffin, or some say a glass coffin, and suspended by chains from the ceiling of the tower. The coffin would hang in the darkness, 45 meters above the ground, far from the touch of any human hand. And every morning at dawn, when the sun rose in the east, its light would pour through the small window in the conical roof and illuminate Qabus's body, bathing it in golden light. It sounds like a fairy tale, but there is evidence that makes historians think it might be true. First, there are those chains still hanging from the ceiling. Why would chains be there unless something was meant to be suspended? Second, the single window faces exactly east. If the tower were just a monument or an observatory, why only one window and why facing the rising sun? The placement is too deliberate to be accidental. Third, in 1990, Russian archaeologists, believing there might be treasure inside, dug a 17-meter shaft straight down through the middle of the tower's floor. They found only brick foundations, continuing down to an incredible depth. There was no burial chamber below. This suggests that if Qabus was buried there, his body must have been above ground, not below.
Fourth, the custom of elevated burial makes sense in the context of Zoroastrian traditions. Remember, this was northern Persia, a region where Zoroastrianism had been the dominant religion for centuries before Islam arrived. Zoroastrians believed that bodies should not touch the earth, as this would pollute the sacred elements. They exposed their dead in towers of silence, where vultures would consume the flesh, and the bones would be placed in ossuaries. Qabus, though Muslim, was deeply connected to Persian culture and may have incorporated Zoroastrian elements into his burial plans. The tower meets many criteria for a Zoroastrian-style burial. The body is elevated, not touching the ground. It is exposed to sunlight. It is placed in an impermeable container, glass or crystal. This would be a syncretic practice, blending Islamic and Zoroastrian traditions in a way that honored both. Fifth, there is that strange, lingering odor of decay that visitors have reported for centuries. Even today, some say there is an ancient smell inside the tower, as if something organic has been there for a very long time. So was Qabus really buried in a glass coffin, hanging from the ceiling, bathed in sunlight each morning? We may never know for certain, but the legend persists, and the evidence is tantalizing. Some scholars offer an alternative theory. Perhaps the tower was meant to be an observatory. Qabus was fascinated by astronomy. He studied the stars with al-Biruni. He wrote poetry about the heavens. The tower's height would make it perfect for astronomical observations. The single eastern window could have been used to mark the sunrise during different seasons, allowing precise calendar calculations. But this theory has problems. Why the chains? Why the elaborate tomb-like construction? Why did the inscription call it a tall palace for the prince, suggesting it was his personal monument? The most likely answer is that the tower served multiple purposes. It was a tomb, a monument to Qabus's glory, a landmark for travelers, and possibly an astronomical observatory. In Qabus's mind, all these purposes were connected. He wanted to reach toward the stars, to be remembered forever, and to rest in a place where the sun would greet him every morning for eternity. Whatever its exact purpose, the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower achieved its goal. It became one of the most famous structures in Persia. It inspired countless other tomb towers across Iran, Anatolia, and Central Asia. Architects studied it, trying to understand its structural genius. Poets wrote verses about it. Travelers marveled at it. And Qabus could finally rest, knowing that his legacy was secure. Or so he thought. But sometimes, even the greatest monuments cannot protect against the cruelty of fate. Betrayal and darkness. For all his brilliance, Qabus had a fatal flaw. He was cruel. He was a man of contradictions, gentle with poets and scholars, but harsh with soldiers and officials. He could spend hours discussing philosophy and then order the execution of a general for the smallest mistake. He was generous to intellectuals, but ruthless with anyone he perceived as disloyal. As the years passed, his cruelty grew worse. He became paranoid, suspicious of everyone around him. He would fly into rages over minor offenses. His generals and commanders began to fear him. Even his closest advisors walked on eggshells, never knowing when the kind, scholarly king would transform into a tyrant. By 1012, the situation had become unbearable. The army generals held secret meetings. They whispered in dark corners. They knew that if they didn't act, one of them would eventually be the next victim of Qabus's wrath. And so they formed a conspiracy. The plan was simple, but brutal. They would depose Qabus and replace him with his son, Manuchihr, who was governing the province of Tabaristan. Manuchihr was younger, more malleable, and most importantly, he was not known for sudden violent outbursts. The conspirators sent a message to Manuchihr. "Your father has become unstable. He is destroying the kingdom with his cruelty. If you don't act, you will never inherit the throne. He will kill you too eventually. Join us, take the crown, save the kingdom." Manuchihr was torn. He loved his father. He knew Qabus was a great man, a scholar, a patron of learning, but he also knew that the conspirators were right. His father's behavior had become increasingly erratic and dangerous. If he refused to join the conspiracy, he might lose everything. If he agreed, he would save himself and possibly preserve his father's legacy by preventing a violent civil war. With a heavy heart, Manuchihr agreed. The conspirators moved quickly. They surrounded Qabus's castle outside Gorgan. They took control of the capital. They declared that Qabus was no longer fit to rule. When Qabus realized what was happening, he tried to flee to Bistam, a fortress city where he hoped to gather loyal forces. But it was too late. The conspirators caught him, they brought him back, and they made him an offer. Abdicate peacefully, and you can live out your days in a castle, in peace, with your books and your poetry. Refuse, and we will take the throne by force. Qabus, seeing that resistance was futile, agreed. He would step down. He would become a scholar king in retirement, spending his final years studying the stars and writing verses. But as they were escorting him to his prison castle, Qabus asked one of the rebel generals, a man named Abdallah, a simple question. Who organized this conspiracy?
Abdallah, perhaps feeling guilty, perhaps wanting Qabus to understand, told him the truth. He named 5 generals, and he explained, "Your Majesty, we did this because of your cruelty. You were a great king, a brilliant man, but you became too harsh. We feared for our lives." Qabus, hearing this, smiled bitterly. "You are right," he said. "I was too cruel. I should have seen this coming. In fact, I should have ordered the execution of all 5 of you, and you, Abdallah, before the conspiracy even began. That was my mistake."
Even in defeat, even admitting his fault, Qabus remained coldly calculating. This terrified the conspirators even more. If Qabus was thinking about who he should have killed, what would he do if they gave him any chance to escape or regain power? They had promised him a comfortable retirement, but promises are easy to break. Qabus arrived at the castle where he was supposed to spend the rest of his life. It was winter, 1012. The region was cold, the winds harsh. Qabus went inside, expecting to find warmth, books, perhaps a chance to continue his studies in solitude. Instead, the conspirators showed their true colors. They decided that as long as Qabus lived, he would be a threat. Someone might try to restore him to power. Some loyal general might stage a coup. It was too risky. So they chose a method of execution that was both horrifying and symbolic. They left Qabus in the castle, and they let him freeze to death. Some accounts say they locked him in a cold tower with no fire, no blankets, nothing. They simply waited for the winter to kill him. Others say they stripped him of his warm clothing and left him exposed to the icy winds. Either way, the result was the same. Qabus ibn Vashmagir, the brilliant warrior poet, the patron of geniuses, the man who built a tower that reached toward the sky, died alone in the freezing cold, betrayed by his own army, abandoned by his own son. He was around 60 years old, he had ruled for 35 years, and now he was gone. The news spread slowly through the kingdom. When the scholars heard, they wept. When the poets heard, they composed elegies. When al-Biruni, who by then was in another city, heard of Qabus's death, he wrote of the cruelty of fate, how the man who had supported learning so generously had been destroyed by those who cared only for power. But the greatest tribute to Qabus was already complete. The tower, his golden tower standing alone on the plains of Gorgan, would carry his name forward through the centuries, long after everyone who betrayed him had been forgotten. And, according to legend, that is where they buried him, in the glass coffin, suspended by chains, bathed in morning sunlight, in the tower he had built with his own vision and determination. Whether the legend is true or not, the tower became his tomb, his monument, his eternal voice crying out across time, "I was here, I mattered, I created something that will never die." The tower that defies time. After Qabus's death, the kingdom of Gorgan eventually fell to other powers. His son, Manucher, ruled for a while, but the Ziryadid dynasty was in decline. Within a few generations, they were gone. New empires rose and fell. The Seljuks came, then the Khwarezmians, then the Mongols, and when the Mongols came, they destroyed everything. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the Mongol invasions devastated northern Persia. The ancient city of Georgian, the capital where Qabus had hosted al-Biruni and waited for Ibn Sina, was burned to the ground. The palaces where poets once recited their verses became piles of rubble. The libraries where scholars debated philosophy were reduced to ashes. The markets where silk and spices had been traded became ghost towns. Everything was destroyed. Everything except the tower. The Gonbad-e Qabus Tower stood alone in the ruins. The Mongols could not tear it down. The bricks were too strong, the engineering too perfect. It had no wooden parts to burn, no decorations to loot. It was just brick and geometry and unbreakable determination. Centuries passed. The tower survived. Earthquakes shook the region, the tower swayed but did not fall. Storms battered it, the bricks held firm. Russian soldiers in the 19th century reportedly even shelled it, trying to bring it down, hoping there was treasure inside. The tower survived. By the 20th century, the ancient city of Georgian was long gone, but the tower remained. A new city grew up around it, and the people named it Gonbad-e Qabus, the city of Qabus's dome. The tower had become the center of a new community, just as Qabus would have wanted. In 1937, German urban planners designed the modern layout of the city, with the tower at its heart. In 1975, the Iranian government declared the tower a national monument, and in 2012, UNESCO recognized Gonbad-e Qabus as a World Heritage Site, calling it an outstanding example of early Islamic innovative structural design and exceptional evidence of the power and quality of the Ziyaratid civilization. Today, the tower stands in a beautiful park in the center of Gonbad-e Qabus city in Golestan province. Visitors come from all over the world to marvel at it. They stand at the base, looking up at the golden bricks stretching toward the sky, and they feel the same awe that travelers felt 1,000 years ago. The tower is still 53 meters tall, about 17 stories. You can still see the 10 flanged buttresses rising like the edges of a star. You can still read the Kufic inscription announcing Qabus's name and titles in elegant rhymed prose. You can still enter through the single doorway and stand inside the vast hollow cylinder, feeling the silence and darkness that have existed for a millennium. And if you stand at a specific spot just outside the entrance, something magical happens. The tower's acoustic properties create an echo that carries voices back to you, a haunting reminder that this tower was designed not just as a tomb, but as a monument to communication, to knowledge, to the human voice that reaches across time. Scientists and architects still study the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower, trying to understand exactly how it has survived so long. The engineering is so sophisticated that even with modern computers, it's difficult to fully explain why the structure is so stable. The ratio of height to diameter, the angle of the buttresses, the thickness of the walls, everything is calculated with mathematical precision.
The truth is probably a combination of all these factors, plus one more: the sheer brilliance of the architects who designed it. These were men who understood mathematics, physics, and material science at a level that was centuries ahead of their time. They were the heirs of the Islamic Golden Age, trained in the same intellectual tradition as al-Biruni and Ibn Sina. They applied that knowledge to create a structure that would outlast empires. The legacy that never dies. But the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower is more than just an engineering marvel. It's a testament to what humans can achieve when they value knowledge, when they support scholars, when they believe that wisdom is more important than conquest. Qabus was not a perfect man. He was cruel, paranoid, and ultimately died because of his own flaws. But he was also a man who loved learning with a passion that transformed his kingdom. He invited the greatest minds of his age to his court. He gave them freedom to think, to write, to explore. He built a library that rivaled any in the world. He protected intellectuals when tyrants like Sultan Mahmud wanted to imprison them. The scholars who benefited from his patronage went on to change the world. Al-Biruni's work on chronology influenced how we understand history and time. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine remained the standard medical textbook in Europe for 600 years. The philosophical ideas developed in Qabus's court shaped Islamic thought for centuries. And the tower itself became a prototype. After the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower was built, tomb towers began appearing all over Iran, Anatolia, and Central Asia. The Togrul Tower in Ray, the Mehmandus Tower in Damgan, the minarets of the great mosques of Isfahan, all were influenced by Qabus's vision.
Even in modern times, the tower inspired architects. Hushang Seiyun, one of Iran's most famous 20th-century architects, used the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower as his model when he designed the tomb of Abu Ali Sina, or Avicenna, in Hamadan in the 1950s. Seiyun understood that there was a poetic connection between Qabus and Ibn Sina, the patron and the genius who almost met, united across centuries by their love of wisdom. When you think about it, the story of the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower is really a story about what we choose to value. Qabus could have spent his wealth on armies and conquered more territory. He could have built massive palaces filled with gold and jewels. He could have erected statues of himself in every city. Instead, he built a tower of pure mathematics and geometry. He invested in scholars rather than soldiers. He created a center of learning rather than an empire of conquest. And ironically, while the empires of his time have all disappeared, his tower still stands, silent, precise, and unbroken after more than 1,000 years. That is the quiet lesson of the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower. Power fades, borders vanish, names are forgotten, but ideas endure, knowledge endures. Structures built on understanding rather than force have a way of surviving time itself. The tower does not shout, it does not dominate the landscape with excess, it simply is, a vertical line of thought rising from the earth towards the sky. Today, as the sun moves across its fluted brick surface and shadows slowly rotate around its base, the tower continues to do what it has always done, remind us that the greatest monuments are not built to intimidate others, but to inspire future generations. In a world that often celebrates speed, noise, and power, the Gonbad-e Qabus Tower offers a different message, one written in brick, geometry, and silence. And perhaps that is why it still matters, not just as the tallest brick tower in the world, but as a timeless symbol of what humanity can achieve when it chooses wisdom over domination and knowledge over fear.